The sincerity in his words made her chest tighten. She realized that for all his wealth, his influence, and the effortless confidence he wore like a second skin, he wasn't offering her an escape from her life. He was offering her a chance to live it differently, but only if she wanted to. She looked back out the window, the city stretching endlessly in every direction. The Eiffel Tower's glow painted the night with possibility, and she thought about the past 48 hours. The wrong gate, the wrong plane, the wrong destination, and yet every wrong step had somehow led her to a place that felt more right than anything she'd chosen in years. Finally, she drew in a breath and said, "One more day." The corner of his mouth lifted, not in triumph, but in quiet acknowledgement. "One more day," he repeated. The next morning, James kept his word. He didn't fill the hours with meetings or obligations. Instead, he took her on a slow wander through the city. They walked through markets where the air was rich with the smell of fresh bread and roasting chestnuts, browsed small art galleries tucked into cobblestone streets, and sat in a tiny cafe sipping coffee so strong it made her eyes water. Every so often, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and something warmer, deeper. At one point, they crossed the Pont Neuf bridge, the Seine glinting beneath them. She stopped to lean against the stone railing, watching the river's slow current. James joined her, resting his hands beside hers. "Do you know what I was thinking when I saw you walk onto that plane, Tia?" he asked. She shook her head. "I was thinking you looked like someone who had spent a long time taking care of everyone but herself, and I wondered what it would take to make you see that you deserve more than just surviving." Her throat tightened. She wasn't us. Into being seen like that, not by her colleagues, not by friends, and certainly not by someone who had only known her for a short time. And yet he was right, somewhere along the way. She had started living like her own needs were the last on the list. By the time the afternoon sun dipped low and the city began to glow again, they returned to the hotel. Elena knew their agreement, one more day, was nearly over. But instead of the dread she expected, she felt an odd peace. She had given herself this. No one else had decided it for her. That evening, over dinner in a quiet rooftop restaurant, James raised his glass to her. "To the wrong plane," he said with a faint smile. She laughed softly, clinking her glass against his. "To the wrong plane." When they returned to the suite, she found herself lingering by the door, reluctant to say goodnight. James noticed, but instead of pressing, he simply said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've reminded me that there's more to life than the next deal, and I hope you've remembered something about yourself too." She nodded, her chest warm. "I have." The next morning, as the car waited to take her to the airport, Elena stood with her bag in hand, looking at James. She knew she had to go back. Tommy needed her life needed her, but she also knew something had shifted. She wasn't the same woman who had boarded the wrong plane 2 days ago. "I'll see you again," James said, not as a question, but as a quiet promise. She smiled. "Yes, you will." As the car pulled away, Paris faded into the distance, but the feeling didn't. The city, the man, the accident that had turned into something she couldn't explain. They were all still with her. She realized then that maybe the real choice wasn't between leaving and staying. It was between going back to who she had been and stepping into whoever she was becoming. And for the first time into years, she felt like she was choosing the sky. Ultra-realistic cinematic video inside a luxurious private jet, elegant cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, soft golden sunlight streaming through oval windows, serene sky and faint ocean visible outside. Camera slowly pans from the jet's aisle toward a young, beautiful black woman in a neat light blue nurse uniform with matching cap, peacefully asleep, leaning slightly toward the man beside her. Small pink backpack resting against her seat. The man, a handsome white gentleman with light brown hair, wears a crisp white shirt and navy vest with fur-trimmed collar, dark trousers, holding a takeaway coffee cup in one hand, gazing at her with curiosity and interest. Depth of field effect, Smooth cinematic lighting, soft focus on background, high detail skin textures, natural expressions, luxury travel atmosphere, realistic motion, subtle camera shake for realism, 16.9 aspect ratio, 8K quality. A large red arrow graphic appears pointing toward the woman, drawing attention to her as the focal point. Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the Eiffel Tower shimmering in the distance, its lights winking like it knew some secret she didn't. Behind her, the hotel suite was silent, except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. She could still feel the heat of the gossip headlines burning in her mind, the sharp weight of Alistair's scrutiny, the echo of James's question, "Do you want to walk away before you even find out what this could be?" It had lodged itself in her chest, heavy and unrelenting. Her phone buzzed again on the sofa, but she didn't move to pick it up. She knew it was Megan or Aunt Marie checking in, reminding her of the life she had left waiting at home. Tommy would be fine. She knew that logically, but guilt was a stubborn shadow, and it pressed close now, whispering that every minute she stayed was selfish. And yet, another voice, quieter but persistent, reminded her of something James had said. Sometimes the best way to be there for someone else is to let yourself breathe first. The sound of footsteps behind her pulled her from her thoughts. James had changed into a simple dark sweater and jeans, but somehow he still carried that quiet, controlled presence that filled the room. He came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the same view. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been thinking," she replied, her voice low. He glanced at her briefly. "About leaving?" "Yes." "And about staying," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty in her voice. "I've spent so long making choices based on what's safest, what's most practical, and now, for the first time, I'm standing in a moment where I could choose something just because I want it, and it scares me." James's gaze softened, but his tone remained steady. "Everything worth wanting will scare you at first." She turned to face him fully. If I stayed even for a few more days, what happens when I go home? I go back to bills and hospital shifts and grocery lists, and you go back to a life where men like Alistair try to decide who you're seen with. We don't fit, James, not in the real world." He took a slow breath, then stepped closer until she could feel the faint brush of his hand against hers. "The real world isn't something we find. It's something we build. And if we want to, we can build one that fits both of us. But I'm not going to tell you what to choose. I just want you to choose it for yourself, not because you think you have to." Inside a luxurious private jet with cream leather seats and polished wooden paneling, a young black woman dressed in a neat light blue nurse uniform with a matching cap is asleep, leaning slightly toward the man beside her. She has a small pink backpack resting against her seat. The man, a handsome white gentleman with light brown hair, is wearing a sharp white shirt, dark blue vest with a fur-trimmed collar, and black trousers. He is holding a takeaway coffee cup in one hand and gazing at her with curiosity and interest. Sunlight filters through the oval windows, revealing a serene sky and faint ocean below. A large red arrow is pointing toward the woman, suggesting she is the focal point of the scene. Sunlight spilled across the suite in long golden ribbons when Elena woke, filtering through the sheer curtains and casting soft patterns across the bed. For a brief, disoriented moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the faint sound of traffic far below and the subtle scent of fresh flowers from the sitting room reminded her. Paris, James, the wrong plane that had somehow taken her to the right place. She stretched slowly, the kind of lazy stretch she hadn't indulged in for years, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she hadn't woken to the shrill alarm of a 5 a.m. shift. There was no rush, no chaos, only the quiet hum of a city outside her window and the faint memory of James's voice from the night before telling her to think about staying. She showered and changed into the one dress she had thrown into her backpack, a simple navy piece that felt a little too plain for the surroundings, but was the nicest thing she had. When she stepped into the sitting room, James was already there, leaning casually against the back of the sofa, his phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He looked up when he saw her and, without missing a beat, he said, "Good, you're ready. We have somewhere to be." "Somewhere?" she echoed, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. He smiled faintly. "Trust me." They left the hotel in a different car this time, smaller and less conspicuous, weaving through Paris's early morning streets until they reached a part of the city that felt older, quieter. James led her down a narrow side street, stopping in front of a wrought iron gate that opened into what looked like a private garden. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the faint scent of roses. "This," he said as they walked, "is where my mother used to bring me when she wanted me to remember there was life outside of business and obligations. She called it her thinking place." They stopped at a stone bench tucked beneath a flowering tree. From here, the city seemed far away, replaced by the soft buzz of bees and the gentle sway of branches overhead. Elena sat, running her fingers along the cool stone surface. "It's beautiful," she murmured. James sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "She died when I was 23, he said quietly. "I didn't handle it well. I buried myself in the company because I didn't know what else to do. I've been running at full speed ever since." Elena turned to look at him, surprised by how openly he had shared that. There was a stillness in his voice that suggested he didn't talk about her often, maybe not to anyone. "Why bring me here?" she asked softly. His gaze met hers, steady and unguarded. "Because I don't want to forget this part of my life. And you don't seem like the kind of person who lets people forget what matters." The words caught her off guard, and before she could respond, the sound of footsteps broke the moment. Elena looked up to see a man approaching, a tall, sharp-looking figure in a suit with an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that made him hard to ignore, but his expression was tight, his eyes assessing. Her breath caught, but before she could say anything, he glanced away and walked toward the staircase. "Come on, there's more to see." Upstairs, the loft held a small seating area with worn leather chairs and a table scattered with open books. From the window, the city stretched out in a mosaic of rooftops and chimneys, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance. It was quiet here, far from the noise of the streets, and for a moment, Elena forgot entirely that she was supposed to be somewhere else. They talked for what felt like hours, about music, about the places they wanted to see, about the things they feared but rarely admitted out loud. James listened more than she expected, asking questions that went beyond polite curiosity. When she mentioned her brother Tommy, his brow furrowed slightly. "You've been carrying the weight of being both sister and parent for years," he said. "Does anyone ever take care of you?" The question startled her because the truth was no. She had built her life around caring for others, and somewhere along the way, she had stopped expecting anyone to do the same for her. She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "I guess I'm not used to the idea." His eyes stayed on hers. "You should get used to it." It was a simple statement, but it landed with a force she didn't quite understand. Eventually, they left the bookstore, locking it behind them. The streets were almost empty now, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the soft rhythm of their footsteps. When they reached the car, James didn't give the driver an address. Instead, he turned to her. "One more stop," he said. The car climbed a steep hill, winding through narrow streets until they emerged at a lookout point high above the city. Paris lay beneath them like a field of stars, every light flickering against the dark sky. Elena stepped out, the view seemed, stealing her breath. "I bring very few people here," James said, joining her at the railing. "It's the one place I can stand still and remember that no matter how big my life gets, the world is always bigger." They stood side by side, the silence between them comfortable, almost intimate. Elena felt the strange pull again, the sense that this night, this city, this man, were drawing her toward something she hadn't been looking for but couldn't turn away from. And somewhere deep down, she realized she didn't want this to end after tonight. The call that changed the night. The drive back from the overlook was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Elena sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the blurred city lights streaming past the tinted windows. She could still see the view from the hill in her mind, the way Paris had looked like a living constellation beneath them, and for a moment she wished they could have stayed there longer, suspended in that quiet space where nothing else existed. James sat beside her, relaxed, his arm resting casually along the back of the seat, but his presence filled the car in a way that made her keenly aware of every breath she took. When the car finally pulled up to a sleek boutique hotel, she almost didn't notice where they were until the driver stepped out to open the door. The entrance glowed with soft golden light, the kind that made everything look warmer and more inviting than it probably was. She followed James inside, her sneakers sinking into plush carpeting as they passed through the lobby and into the elevator. The ride-up was silent except for the faint hum of the machinery. Elena glanced at their reflections in the mirrored walls. She looked tired but different. There was a faint spark in her eyes, a hint of something she hadn't felt in a long time. James caught her looking and smiled faintly, but said nothing. Some things are meant to feel that way. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night seemed to hold its breath, and Elena found herself aware of the warmth of his presence beside her, the quiet steadiness he carried even in silence. She didn't know where this was going, and she wasn't sure she wanted to, but she knew one thing: this was no longer just one dinner. Secrets in the City of Light. By the time they returned to the waiting car, the streets of Paris had settled into a slower rhythm. The laughter spilling from the cafes had softened, and the air carried that unmistakable late-night coolness that made Elena want to pull her cardigan tighter. But James didn't direct the driver back to what she assumed was his hotel. Instead, he gave a short command in French, and they began weaving deeper into the heart of the city. Elena, sitting beside him in the back seat, glanced over but didn't ask where they were going. Something in his expression told her he wasn't ready to explain yet. The car stopped in front of a narrow street that looked nothing like the glamorous boulevards they had driven through earlier. This was quieter, lined with centuries-old stone buildings, each one with its own story etched into the weathered shutters and ivy-covered walls. James stepped out first and offered his hand, steady and unhurried. "I want to show you something," he said simply. They walked a short distance until they reached a heavy wooden door tucked between two shuttered shops. He pulled out a key, unlocked it, and pushed it open to reveal a dimly lit interior that smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. As her eyes adjusted, Elena realized they were in a bookstore, but not just any bookstore. This was the kind of place that felt timeless, with tall shelves that seemed to touch the ceiling, a wrought iron spiral staircase leading to a loft, and stacks of books piled on every available surface, as though they had been collected by someone who loved them too much to ever let them go. "This is mine," James said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "My grandfather opened it after the war. It's not part of my company. It's personal. I come here whenever I need to remember who I am." Elena turned in a slow circle, taking it in. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it. There was something grounding about the space, as though it existed outside the rush of the modern world. He moved toward a shelf and ran his fingers over the spines of the books, stopping at a worn leather volume. "When I was a kid, my parents sent me to boarding school. I hated it. But every summer I'd come here and my grandfather would let me read anything I wanted. He said books teach you more about people than business ever could." There was a quiet vulnerability in his tone that made her want to ask more, but she stayed silent, sensing this wasn't something he shared easily. He turned to her then, studying her in the soft glow of the single overhead light. "Most people only see one side of my life, the part in magazines, the deals, the numbers. They don't see this." Elena met his gaze, feeling an unexpected weight in her chest. "And why show me?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Because I think you're the kind of person who sees more than what's on the surface." The words lingered in the air, heavier than she expected. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she let her eyes drift back to the shelves, running her fingers over the covers until she stopped at a simple paperback of poetry. She opened it at random and read a line aloud, her voice quiet. "We are all just travelers, finding pieces of ourselves in places we never meant to go." James's gaze sharpened, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his presence. "Maybe that's why you're here," he said. I work at Memorial Hospital, she said finally, swirling the water in her glass before taking a sip. ICU nurse. Most days I feel like I spend more time there than I do in my own home. It's exhausting, but it's also the only thing that feels meaningful. After my parents died, I became my brother's guardian, so I work, I pay the bills, I make sure he's okay. And that's pretty much my life, not exactly champagne and Paris dinners. Something in James's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of something softer beneath the cool confidence. That's a lot to carry, he said, for anyone. Elena shrugged, forcing a small smile. It's life. You do what you have to do. The waiter arrived with their food. Her plate was a delicate arrangement of roasted duck with caramelized apples, while his was a perfectly seared steak, the aroma alone enough to make her forget her exhaustion for a moment. She took a bite and closed her eyes briefly, savoring it. Okay, she admitted. This might actually be worth accidentally getting on the wrong plane. James smiled faintly at that, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. You know, most people would have spent this entire time trying to figure out how to get back home. You seem willing to stay. I said one dinner, she reminded him, but the words didn't have as much conviction as she wanted them to. The truth was, she had felt something shift inside her the moment she stepped off that plane and saw Paris stretched out before her. It wasn't just the beauty of the city. It was the realization that she had been moving through her life on autopilot, and now suddenly she was somewhere she had never planned to be, doing something entirely unplanned, and it felt alive. As the night went on, they moved from polite conversation into something deeper. James told her about growing up in Boston, the youngest of three brothers, and how he had taken over his father's company after a sudden illness. He didn't go into details about the company itself, and Elena didn't press, but she caught a glimpse of the weight he carried, the kind of pressure that came with running an empire. At one point he asked, "When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" She thought about it longer than she expected to. I can't remember. Probably before my parents' accident. After that, everything I did was for Tommy or for work. I guess I forgot how to put myself first. James's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe this is the first time in a long time you have a chance to remember. There was something in the way he said it that made her chest tighten. Not flirtatious, not mocking, but almost as if he understood her in a way no one else had. And that scared her, because this was not supposed to be anything more than an accident, a few hours in Paris before she found a way back to her own world. When dessert came, a delicate chocolate soufflé, Elena found herself laughing at something James had said about his terrible cooking skills. The sound felt strange to her, as if she hadn't laughed like that in years. She realized then that somewhere between the first course and the last spoonful of chocolate, she had stopped feeling like she was sitting across from a stranger. After dinner, James stood and offered her his hand. Come on, Paris doesn't sleep yet. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. Outside, the city glowed under 1,000 street lamps. The air was cool but pleasant, and the sound of distant music floated through the streets. James led her along the Seine, their footsteps slow, unhurried. They passed bookstalls, couples leaning against the railing to watch the river, and street artists sketching under the dim glow of their own portable lamps. At one point, Elena stopped to look. Over the water, her reflection merging with the shimmer of the Eiffel Tower far in the distance. This feels unreal, she murmured. James stepped beside her, his voice low, Elena's breath caught. It's beautiful, she whispered before she could stop herself. James followed her gaze. It is, and it's even better when you see it up close. The landing was smooth, the kind that barely made her realize the wheels had touched down. The moment the door opened, a rush of crisp evening air filled the cabin. Paris smelled different, cleaner somehow, with a faint sweetness she couldn't place. A sleek black car was waiting for them at the foot of the stairs. The driver greeted James in fluent French, then took their bags. Elena hesitated at the top of the steps, looking back toward the plane, wondering if she could still find a way to return home quietly before this spiraled into something she couldn't handle. James seemed to read her thoughts. If you want to go back right now, I can arrange it, he said, his voice calm. but I'd recommend staying for at least one dinner. Paris has a way of changing people." She looked at him, at the quiet confidence in his eyes, at the city waiting just beyond the gates, and before she could second-guess herself, she nodded. One dinner. His lips curved into a smile that was just shy of triumphant. Good choice. The car slid through Paris's streets, past glowing shop windows and bustling cafes. Elena pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass, drinking in every detail, the accordion music spilling from a corner bistro, the laughter of people sitting shoulder to shoulder under glowing string lights, the way the cobblestones seemed to carry the weight of centuries. When they stopped in front of a restaurant tucked between two tall, elegant buildings, she stepped out into a world that felt like it had been painted just for her. The air was warm but carried a faint evening chill, the kind that made her want to wrap herself in something soft. Inside, the lighting was golden and intimate, the scent of fresh bread and garlic butter floating in the air. James led her to a small table near the window, where she could watch the life of Paris pass by outside. As they sat, Elena realized with a strange mix of nerves and excitement that for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her next shift, her bills, or even the weight of her responsibilities. She was just here, in this moment, in Paris, across from a man whose world was a universe away from hers, and she had no idea where this night was going to take her, the dinner that changed everything. The restaurant's warm golden light wrapped around Elena like a blanket, softening the edges of her nerves. Outside the tall window, Paris seemed to hum with life, cyclists weaving between cars, couples laughing as they walked hand in hand, a street musician leaning into the melody of his violin. Inside, the low murmur of conversation blended with the faint clinking of silverware and the occasional pop of a cork being pulled from a bottle. Everything felt foreign and yet strangely comfortable, as if this moment had been waiting for her long before she had ever stepped into the wrong gate at the airport. James had removed his jacket, resting it neatly on the back of his chair. Without it, he looked less like the intimidating billionaire she had imagined, and more like a man at ease in his element. The top button of his shirt was undone, and he leaned forward slightly, his attention fully on her. "So, Elena," he began, his voice calm but carrying that low undertone that demanded attention. "Tell me, what exactly does a woman like you do when she isn't accidentally boarding private jets?" The question was simple, yet it carried a weight that made her pause. She could have answered with the surface-level facts. She was a nurse, she worked long shifts, she took care of her younger brother, but the way his gaze stayed locked in, and hers made her feel that he wasn't looking for polite conversation. He wanted to know her. Paris in the distance, Elena sat stiffly in the wide cream leather seat, her hands resting on her lap as though she might break something if she moved too much. The hum of the engines was smooth, not like the loud vibrations of the budget flight she was used to, but it did nothing to calm her racing mind. Her gaze darted from the gold-trimmed cup holder to the soft blanket folded neatly by her side, then to the man across from her. He seemed perfectly at ease, leaning back with one leg crossed over the other, his elbow resting on the armrest, watching the clouds outside as if this flight was no different than stepping into a taxi. Her thoughts tumbled over each other in chaos. She was supposed to be in Atlantic City by noon, sharing a cheap hotel room with Megan, eating greasy pizza, maybe winning $20 at the slots. She was supposed to be laughing over old nursing school memories, not sitting in a flying palace with a stranger whose shoes probably cost more than her rent. The man finally turned his attention to her, his eyes a clear gray that seemed to catch the light. "I'm James Carter," he said simply, as though his name should explain everything. She gave a short nod. "Elena Morris." "I gathered that," he replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "And I also gathered that you were not the woman my assistant arranged to meet me here." Elena felt her cheeks heat. "I didn't mean to get on your plane. I thought it was my gate. I just followed the signs." James leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Do you always follow signs without checking where they lead?" Her lips pressed into a line. "I just came off a night shift. I'm exhausted. I'm not usually this careless." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the strange feeling that he could see right past the messy hair, the faded jeans, the fatigue written in her posture. "Well," he said, "finally. You're here now. And the thing about private jets is, we don't turn around for mistakes." Elena straightened in her seat. "Then drop me off somewhere, anywhere." His smile widened slightly. "And miss the opportunity to introduce a tired nurse to the magic of Paris? That would be a shame." She blinked at him, unsure whether he was teasing or serious. "You don't even know me." "That's the fun part," he replied. She leaned back, crossing her arms, determined not to let him charm her. Yet, as the hours passed and the sky beyond the window shifted from pale blue to the warm gold of late afternoon, her body betrayed her. The exhaustion from the night shift, the warmth of the seat, and the gentle sway of the plane pulled her into a light doze. She woke to the smell of something mouth-watering. James was sitting with a plate in front of him, the faint aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh herbs filling the cabin. "Hungry?" he asked, gesturing to the seat opposite him where a tray had been set with silverware and a steaming dish of her own. She hesitated, then sat down, her stomach betraying her with a loud growl. "This is not airplane food," she said after her first bite. He chuckled. "No, when you fly private, you don't get microwaved mystery meat." For a while, they ate in silence. Elena found herself relaxing, the initial sharp edges of her panic softening. The food was incredible, the seat so comfortable it felt like it was hugging her, and yet every so often, she caught James watching her with that unreadable expression, as if he was cataloging every reaction. When the pilot announced their descent, her heart tightened again. She leaned toward the window, and then the city came into view. Paris, spread out in a stunning mix of history and beauty. The Eiffel Tower rose proudly against the sky, its iron frame glowing in the fading sunlight. The Seine, curved like a ribbon of gold, and the rooftops seemed to stretch endlessly, each one holding 1,000 stories. The wrong gate. Elena Morris's sneakers squeaked against the polished airport floor as she ran, her backpack bouncing on her shoulder. Her eyes stung from exhaustion, and every step felt heavier than the last. She had been awake for nearly 20 hours, 12 of them spent rushing from one ICU room to another, saving strangers, calming families, and trying not to think about her own problems. This weekend was supposed to be her escape. For 3 years, she hadn't taken a real vacation. Since her parents died in a car accident, every dollar she made went toward rent, bills, and taking care of her 14-year-old brother Tommy. She loved him more than anything, but the responsibility had stolen her youth. This weekend in Atlantic City with her nursing school friend Megan was her one shot to breathe again. But now, she was late. Her phone buzzed in her hand. "Megan. They're boarding now. Where are you?" "Almost there," Elena texted back, though she had no idea if she actually was. The signs overhead blurred together. She tried to focus. Gate 23B. That was all she had to remember. She turned a corner and spotted a small group near a sleek glass door. "Finally," she muttered. The sign above read, "Private Aviation Terminal." That didn't sound right, but she was too tired to care. A woman in a crisp navy uniform smiled at her. "Miss Jenkins, we've been expecting you." Elena frowned. "I'm not." "Mr. Carter is ready for boarding," another staff member interrupted, already taking her backpack. Before Elena could form a sentence, she was gently guided down a narrow walkway. Her confusion grew when she saw the aircraft. It wasn't like any plane she'd ever been on. The white fuselage gleamed under the morning sun, and inside soft cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, and even a small bar made her pause in shock. "I think there's been a mistake," she tried again. "Don't worry. Mr. Carter is very understanding," the flight attendant said with a reassuring smile. A man sat by the window, back to her. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored jacket looked like it belonged in a magazine, and even from behind, he radiated confidence. The door closed behind her with a quiet whoosh, and the engines began to hum. The man turned. Elena's breath caught. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, and strikingly handsome in a way that made her suddenly aware of her faded jeans and simple t-shirt. His sharp gaze studied her for a moment. "You're not Vanessa Jenkins," he said. It wasn't a question. "No. I'm Elena Morris," she replied quickly, clutching her phone like a shield. "I think I got on the wrong plane." A slow smile curved his lips. It would seem so. I need to get off. I'm supposed to be on a flight to Atlantic City, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. He leaned back in his seat, clearly amused. I'm afraid we've already begun taxiing, and this is not Atlantic City. Her pulse quickened. Then where are we going? He glanced out the window, then back at her, his smile deepening. Paris. The word hit her like a wave. Paris. She had never even been out of the country. I can't go to Paris, she stammered. My friend is waiting, my brother. You can, he interrupted smoothly. You're already on board. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea who this man really was or why fate had shoved her into his world. But as the jet lifted into the sky, leaving the city shrinking below, she couldn't shake one terrifying thought. Whatever was about to happen, there was no turning back.